made to you so special? Nothing. I'm just a kid from Brooklyn. I was from Brooklyn.
Brooklyn!
Were you scared of that? No, not at all, huh?
Nope. I'm from Brooklyn.
You're from Brooklyn, huh?
I just want to rap. Okay, guys, Frank style, just a guy from Brooklyn, coming at you with my newest ranking of the top 20 animated movies. And to be more specific, these are hand-drawn animated movies. Anything involving computer-generated type of animation like Shrek, Toy Story, Incredibles, Despicable Me, Finding Nemo, any of these movies are just totally out of bounds. The two brand new Spider-Verse movies, after doing some research, I found out that they are really not hand-drawn at all, although they look like they are. They're kind of in a comic book panel style. They are predominantly computer-generated. So therefore, red flag, out of bounds, they're out. But let's get quickly into things. But first, we got to talk about my rules. Rule number 1, spoilers. I'm just going to hit you with a heavy spoiler warning. Rule number 2, this is a favorites list, not a best list. So the best way that you can come back at me is to give me yours through the comments section. I'm going to give you one lone honorable mention. This is my guilty pleasure pick, and this is Cool World. Came out in 1992. This is basically a trashy version of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Family friendly, this ain't. It's not lacking in star power either, with Kim Basinger, Brad Pitt, and Gabriel Byrne. Creator Ralph Bakshi originally envisioned an animated horror movie of sorts, but it went through some drastic rewrites and turned into something a little bit more, I'm going to say, erotic. It's weird. It's really weird. And I'm not going to lie, this isn't regarded as a good film, and for good reason. The acting by the human characters isn't exactly Oscar-worthy, and other than a few of the cartoon characters, the rest don't look very good. The story is laughable and the writing atrocious. The movie also bombed at the box office, although it did develop a cult following later on. But the cartoon world created is very abstract and immersive. I've always been a fan of Bakshi's work, and the character Hollywood, spelled exactly how you think it is really interesting, and yeah, she's pretty hot. Not that I would find a cartoon character to be attractive.
Hey, did you see The Little Mermaid on TV the other night? No? Ariel, man, she's so hot.
Ralph Bakshi is a very, very interesting guy. He is known to collaborate with other artists. In this movie, he hired underground comics artist Spain Rodriguez. Coming in at number 20 is Disney's Beauty and the Beast. Came out in 1991. Did you really think that Disney was not going to be on this list? They are the gold standard for this genre. Everything here in this movie checks the boxes. Artwork, story, music, and that extra Disney magic. I particularly like the villain Gaston, who's that guy that everybody just loves to hate. The only thing holding this movie back on my list is that I'm just not exactly the target audience for this type of movie, but I highly recommend it for someone looking to entertain their entire family. I did get a chance to see the live action Emma Watson version, and although I'm not a fan of these remakes, this was definitely one of the better ones. Coming in at number 19 is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Came out in 1988. I find it so interesting how a movie that was so innovative and popular when it debuted became so forgotten shortly after. Audiences never saw anything like this before. Sure, you had movies like Pete's Dragon, which gave you a little taste, but this was a smorgasbord of all your favorite cartoons interacting with the real world with no limitations. Although it's not trashy like Cool World, Jessica Rabbit is drawn with extremely stimulating curves. She was all the rage back then. I even remember going to high school with a kid who had a Jessica Rabbit tattoo. Some things just don't age very well. The movie looked great, but the main story was kinda eh. All the greats from Disney, Warner Brothers, and others were fun, but they were more like side characters doing cameos. I would have preferred that they be more involved with the main story. Perhaps this is the reason that this movie just dissipated into the limelight. Coming in at number 18 is Fire and Ice, came out in 1983. This is a sword and sorcery tale about an evil ice prince named Necron, who wants to conquer the southern lava kingdom by kidnapping its princess, Tigra. The majority of this movie is her being kidnapped, then escaping, then being recaptured in a wash, rinse, and repeat way that might annoy you. She's aided by a guy named Larn, but he's constantly tripping over his own feet. So he gets help from a badass aptly named Dark Wolf. Somehow they must find a way to stop Necron from covering everything with ice. This movie leans towards the adult side despite it being rated PG. It has some rough violence, but the most interesting thing is that this movie has zero nudity. But the way it's drawn, there might as well be. People are barely dressed at all. Most men are wearing what Victoria's Secret would describe as cheeky thongs. Princess Tigra is wearing a bikini made out of dental floss. Not that I'm complaining. On the contrary, I could watch Princess Tigra laying around all day. This is another Ralph Bakshi creation, and this time he got Frank Frazetta of Conan and Vampirella fame. So it's time to talk about a particular art style that was very, very popular back in the 70s, and it's called rotoscoping. And Bakshi loved to use this in his films. It's basically taking live people, having them film scenes, and basically tracing over them, giving a very, very realistic effect to a hand-drawn image. It looks really great, but it's also extremely tedious work as they have to go back to the film and frame by frame do one particular drawing for each frame. It looks fantastic, and you're going to notice it in Bakshi's films. Unfortunately, this movie did fail at the box office. Why did it fail? I think for the reasons that I mentioned. But with these older films, they get a following, and this has a huge cult following. Coming in at number 17 is The Iron Giant. Came out in 1999. Now, I'm sure most people who do rankings like me would have The Iron Giant way much higher on their list. My only problem is this is the first time that I've seen the movie. I just don't have any nostalgia for the movie. But I will say that even though I've only seen it once, I fell in love with The Iron Giant immediately. How can you not? It's a beautiful story. You just tap into something with the kid developing this great friendship with this living sentient robot from outer space. You end up just truly caring about what's going to happen to them. I totally see why he's always mentioned whenever animated movies are discussed. He even made an appearance in the movie Ready Player One recently, which lets you know that he's an icon of pop culture. The animation was done by George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic. Coming in at number 16 is Green Lantern First Flight, came out in 2009. Josh Krubner from Restricted Media described this best as training day in space. It's not perfect. The story's a little slightly dumbed down. Power of will powers the green rings, and the power of fear powers the yellow rings. This movie just ignores all that, just shows you, displays the colors. As far as Green Lantern's training, once he gets the ring, they kind of speed through that almost. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I already know how to use the ring. I will say this, the story here is far better than that Ryan Reynolds live action shit show that we got not too long ago. You know, the Green Lantern Corps, They're kind of like a police force in space. And so this takes advantage of that. Predominantly, the movie takes place in space. And so you get to see more aliens and a lot more interesting things are going on. You also see the struggle with Sinestro. He's more fleshed out in this, and you can see he's being conflicted by the way the Green Lantern Corps do their policing of the galaxy. King Kong ain't got shit on him. Coming in at number 15 is The Chipmunk Adventure. Came out in 1987. Back in the day, my brother and I used to go to this movie theater in Bayside, Queens, where the security was pretty much non-existent. So we paid for one movie and watched 2 to 3 in a day. So one day we sneak in to see The Chipmunk Adventure, and we absolutely loved it. The story was so fun. The chipmunks are like racing the chipettes around the world in these hot air balloons. There's this kind of secret thing going on where diamonds are being exchanged for money. And of course, you know, Dave is right in the middle of everything and oblivious to what's going on. The Chipmunk songs, I grew up listening to them. I grew up watching the Chipmunk Saturday morning cartoon. The songs here are really, really good. There's actually a song where both the Chipmunks and Chipettes kind of like battle for who's best. But there is some fun action, some fun sets, and it's really, really funny for a chipmunk type adventure. The artwork for the Chipmunk Adventure was also a boost from the Saturday morning level. It looks fantastic. Coming in at number 14 is Batman Assault on Arkham. Came out in 2014. Although Batman is on the title, this is actually a Suicide Squad movie. And I believe it's got a superior story to the live action 2016 Suicide Squad movie. Amanda Waller assembles Task Force X to break into Arkham Asylum to retrieve the Riddler's cane in order to stop the Joker from blowing up Gotham. They must do this while avoiding Batman and hope that Waller doesn't blow their heads off. You've got all the major players: Harley Quinn, Deadshot, King Shark, and Captain Boomerang. Things get really awkward when Harley, who broke up with the Joker, sound familiar? And she gets a little cozy with Deadshot. So you got a nice little weird love triangle here. Unlike the 2016 version, this doesn't make the mistake of Joker being a side character. The artwork has kind of an anime style to it, which looks good, although I was a little disappointed with the grayish color scheme. I would rather see those colors pop. Coming in at number 13 is Disney's Aladdin. Came out in 1992. The 90s were clearly the golden years for the House of Mouse, as they could just do no wrong. Hit after hit, they were on a roll. Aladdin is a musical fantasy comedy about a street kid who discovers a magic lamp and uses his 3 wishes to impress the princess Jasmine. But the lamp is coveted by the evil Jafar, who wants to be Sultan. Robin Williams is this movie. He's so good as the genie that I refuse to watch the live action Will Smith version. I can still remember Robin Williams on Mork and Mindy. He's just a comic genius, a legend. May he rest in peace. Speaking of comic geniuses, I must mention a favorite of mine, and that is Gilbert Gottfried.
Somebody wait. Come right in. Don't let the fact that my door's closed dissuade you in any way from entering my office.
Plays the parrot. Everything that comes out of his mouth is, I just love it. I just love anything this guy does. Coming in at number 12 is Perfect Blue. Came out in 1997. This was recommended to me by the lovely Winter Snow Pino, the only person I know who spends more time in Facebook jail than in her home streets in Philly. She's all about them Johns. This anime horror psychological thriller masterpiece is riveting, with a pop star named Mima who leaves her girl band to pursue an acting career. But not all is as it seems, as she's being stalked by a crazy fan, and people all around her are being murdered. She ends up in an isolated state, haunted by her pop star persona. The song her band sings always burrows itself into my head and takes days to get out. Although it's a very colorful and bubbly movie, don't be fooled. This is not for children. As with all anime, you have to be extremely careful. It's got lots of explicit content, so please beware. Coming in at number 11 is The Secret of Nim, came out in 1982. My mother, a bilingual New York City school teacher for over 20 years, she just was always influencing me in so many different ways. One day she starts bragging to me about a book she's reading to her class named Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. So I said, what the hell, and read it. And I was totally blown away. Next thing you know, I'm in my local video store looking for something to watch, and I see the VHS staring right back at me. The title change didn't fool me for a second. But what I didn't realize back then was who did the artwork. Don Bluth, a fantastic artist who left Disney and started working on his own stuff. Besides Nim, he's responsible for hits like American Tail and the arcade phenomenon known as Dragon's Lair, one of my favorite video games of all time. The Secret of Nim is a dark fantasy story about a widowed field mouse desperate to move her home before the plow destroys her family. It's a beautiful story with a message about experimentation on animals. And the artwork is stunning. Bluth just happens to be my favorite artist. Coming in at number 10 is Disney's Hercules, came out in 1997. An extremely underrated film as it dared to go with artwork very different from the Disney norm. While other greats sport a Robin Williams or an Eddie Murphy, this sports a powerful trinity of James Woods, Danny DeVito, and Bobcat Goldthwait. These guys are hitting you with laugh bombs from all directions. You add the snarky love interest Megara, and Hercules almost feels like a side character in his own movie. Woods is the scene stealer here, playing the villain Hades. And Bobcat's voice alone makes me laugh my ass off.
Hey, Box!
Business is slow.
Get a new business or move out of the neighborhood! Ah!
Where the movie is weakest is the gospel-style soundtrack / narration that just didn't work with the Greek mythology setting. Coming in at number 9 is Ninja Scroll, came out in 1993. Feudal Japan and ninja are just my cup of tea. Fair warning, as this has extremely adult content. Ninja Scroll is regarded by many as one of the most influential anime films ever made. Alongside Akira and Ghost in the Shell, it was responsible for increasing the popularity of adult-oriented anime outside Japan. Ninja mercenary Jubei Kibagame and Kagero, a female ninja skilled in the arts of poison, take on the 8 devils of Kimon. These 8 devils are just a crazy group of characters. There's a guy who can change his skin into rock. He throws this huge sword at people. There's another guy whose back is like a beehive. There's a woman who has tattoos of snakes all over her body, and then the snakes can actually come out of her and she can use them as weapons, like a blind swordsman who's almost impossible to kill. It's just so extreme and it has no limits. Coming in at number 8 is Batman Under the Red Hood, came out in 2010. With so many great Batman movies, you'd think it was tough, but this is my clear favorite because it does so many things right. And it concentrates on the Robin characters like Dick Grayson and Jason Todd. The artwork is crisp and the story is solid. Many have pointed out that the Red Hood story and the Winter Soldier story are kind of the same thing. Some might not realize that Bucky in the comics was a Robin-like sidekick with even the same style Robin mask. But there's no crime here, as Marvel and DC have been copying each other for decades. I did not grow up reading DC comics, so I find this stuff a little bit more interesting, as a lot of it is very new to me. Coming in at number 7 is Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings, came out in 1978. For those who grew up watching the Peter Jackson movies, you might not even know that this thing exists. Growing up, the Lord of the Rings books were a high level of geek that I never reached, so this was my first experience with Tolkien. This single movie actually covers the first 2 books, and you can spot some scenes that Jackson used paying homage. Bakshi's rotoscope style works well for the most part, but there are huge battle scenes which suffer because they're just too big in scale. Proof that the movie was made too soon to cover such a complex story. I know some are probably asking, why would you watch this when you have Peter Jackson's trilogy? Because it's a fun little time capsule version that has its moments. Coming in at number 6 is Heavy Metal, came out in 1981. This strange Canadian adult sci-fi fantasy anthology centers around a glowing green orb, which is the embodiment of pure evil. It's a true collaboration as we get different art styles, voice actors, and stories backed by a soundtrack of classic rock songs. This is rated R stuff, so you have to put the kids to sleep before you throw this on. All of the stories are really fun and wild and crazy, but 3 in particular are the ones that always stood out for me. The first is the story of a futuristic taxi driver that goes on a kind of adventure involving the green orb. Many years later, we ended up with a movie called The Fifth Element. Are they the same story? No, but they have some similarities. So I always wondered if this was an influence for that. The second story is about a kid who, with the power of the orb, gets transported to a planet far, far away. He's given this huge jacked up body, and he ends up going on all these crazy adventures. What this guy goes through is basically the stuff that young boys dream about. Gets involved with women, and he fights, and he's like the hero, and he saves the day. And last but not least is the final story with a barbarian woman named Tarna, spelled with 2 A's, flying on a pterodactyl creature on a quest for revenge for the killing of her people. This is one of those influences on me. It kind of helped, kickstart puberty for me. Seeing this woman, she starts out by heading to this temple, and she bears all. She darns this really cool outfit, gets this really powerful sword, and then she goes after these kind of evil zombie-like creatures were all created by the orb. She has kind of these ties to the orb. It all gets revealed at the end of the movie in stunning fashion. It's really awesome. This movie is just fantastic. Coming in at number 5 is Disney's Mulan, came out in 1998. General audiences didn't know the story of Fa Mulan, but I noticed the premise all too quickly, as it was extremely similar to 1985's High School Comedy, Just One of the Guys. And comedy is the key here, as it's very funny, even for a family-friendly cartoon. Eddie Murphy, for whatever reason, was falling out of favor in Hollywood, so he started putting in the work in voice acting. And it was a perfect marriage, just like Aladdin and Robin Williams. It just worked. I'm also a bit biased, as I'm a huge fan of martial arts movies. Whenever my daughter and I got together, she loved these Disney movies. So whenever she would pick one to watch, I secretly hoped it was this one. Coming in at number 4 is G.I. Joe the movie, came out in 1987. But this was toned down before release because of the backlash of the previous year. Movies just felt like soulless cash grabs. It does have some decent voice actors in Don Johnson and Burgess Meredith, who played Mickey from the Rocky movies, and of course the famous wrestler Sergeant Slaughter, who plays himself. Duke, one of the famous G.I. Joes from the beginning run, he was supposed to die at the hands of Serpentor in a pretty bloody fashion after what happened, as I mentioned earlier. They what Commander's face looked like under that faceplate. Guess what? This movie shows it to you. Coming in at number 3 is Disney's Tarzan, came out in 1999. Being a fan of the underrated Greystoke, the legend of Tarzan, I was intrigued by what Disney could do with such a famous story, centered around a child being raised by apes. It surpassed my expectations. To call Tarzan visually stunning would be a colossal understatement, as the jungle is almost alive with some sort of immersive 3D element. You add to all that eye candy a score and soundtrack by music legend Phil Collins, which works perfectly. Watching Tarzan swing around in those old black and white movies, and even in Greystoke, it did look kind of silly. So Disney was very clever in using skateboarding, surfing kind of style.
I've been watching my son do his skateboarding and snowboarding, and I really wanted to see Tarzan as a tree surfer. Started thinking of Tarzan as kind of having this attitude. Thought, how's he going to surf? Okay, let's let the branches be like moss-covered things, and he can slide down these things.
There's a ton of action, but more important, this movie has so much heart. It's a truly feel-good experience. My favorite character, ironically, is Jane, played by Minnie Driver.
Daddy, what's all the hullabaloo about?
She really knocked it out the park on this one. I never knew that she had this kind of level of comedy in her. And my animated movie runner-up is Disney's The Lion King, came out in 1994. A kind of reimagining of Shakespeare's Hamlet in Africa with a kingdom of animals in the Pride Lands, which is an actual territory in Africa. Although safe for family audiences, this is quite a dark story, but nothing that Disney hasn't done before. They just hide it with colorful characters and musical numbers. You've got animals killing and eating other animals, but it's almost subtext as you're singing along to Hakuna Matata. The combination of story, cast, and music are absolutely stellar, making it the benchmark for all other Disney projects to follow. If I had a nickel for every time I heard greatest movie since Lion King, I'd be a pretty rich guy. We've also had sequels, TV series, spin-offs, and a live-action remake that I find to be a complete abomination.
You're an abomination. An outrage against nature.
But the real gem that accompanies the original is the Broadway musical, which I have seen twice with my daughter. It's a beautiful experience expanding on the story through that medium. And my number 1 hand-drawn animated movie is Transformers: The Movie, came out in 1986. I learned decades later that the main purpose for this movie was to get kids to ditch their old Transformer toys and buy all new ones that were introduced in this movie. But I don't feel like I was bamboozled at all. I watched the television series religiously. This was a continuation of that story. But nothing prepared me for the theater experience. The movie kicks off with the Decepticons attacking an Autobot ship and killing everyone aboard. These were cherished characters I watched on the show, and they were being slaughtered. No one on the show ever died. After all, it was a kids' show. But the mayhem didn't stop here, as the Decepts used the ship to sneak in and attack an Autobot city on Earth. It was like watching the Alamo or the final battle in Platoon with all your favorite Transformers just kicking each other's asses. But then something happened that made my jaw drop. Optimus Prime died. Whoever made this decision will probably live in infamy. But I salute you, whoever you are. That took King Kong size balls. Wow, I just realized I referenced King Kong twice in this ranking. This was the leader, the John Wayne of the Autobots. He was the heart of the show. And from what I heard, most younger kids left the theaters heartbroken. But I thought it was awesome. His nemesis, Megatron, was also upgraded to the more powerful Galvatron. To demonstrate this, his first order of business is decimating his second in command, a favorite of mine, Starscream. He was like that sneaky second in command who was always trying to get Megatron's job. But even more menacing is the Galactus-level Transformer, Unicron, who eats planets for breakfast. So basically you have the surviving Autobots, leaderless, being hunted while they're trying to save their home planet.
I take it the odds are against us and the situation is grim.
You can't win!
The new characters are fun and interesting. The standout being Hot Rod, basically a race car, who's kind of like that young, braggadocious, badass kind of character. You also have RC, which is basically the only female Transformer that had ever shown up at that point. I always found it kind of odd because that makes her basically like the Smurfette of the Transformers world, right? Like, if she's the only female, I guess then every single male Autobot is trying to get some of that. I don't know. I don't know why I think these weird things. Whatever. Other critics have said that this movie is lacking in story. I say, oh no, that is not true. This is the ending of the entire story, which starts with the beginning of the TV series. The story is there. It's just this is the final chapter of it. So I push back on those kind of comments. This movie is extremely 80s. The score was made with a synthesizer, and it sounds absolutely awesome. You've also got some like rock and even metal songs thrown in there. Basically, the music and the score really make the movie rock. The artwork is 20 times better than anything from the television series. To say that I'm a fan of this movie is really, really like selling myself short. I absolutely love this movie. It is my favorite Transformers movie. Yes, that includes the Michael Bay live action movies, which I think the first one is a solid movie. Also have to give credit where credit's due. Michael Bay's movies make a lot of money. Do I think they're good movies? No, I think they're total trash. They're just so ridiculous and they go against everything that the television series, established. Michael Bay is obsessed with like the military and explosions and lots of shaky cam and lens flares and all types of bullshit. Nobody wants that. From the BK, from the city that never sleeps. Peace, baby.
Even if it ain't what it seems, I got a pocket full of dreams, baby. I'm from New York, concrete jungle.